Hello. Thank you for joining today's training on the culture of care, preventing and responding to sexual misconduct with a focus on mandatory reporters. To give a bit of background, a mandatory reporter is an individual designated by the university who has an obligation to report incidents of possible discrimination or harassment, including sexual misconduct. Reports should be made to a Title IX coordinator within 24 hours or as soon as possible. By default, all university employees, including faculty, staff, and AAPs, are considered mandatory reporters unless they fall within a particular exempted group, such as a designated mental health counselor, health professional, or ombudsperson. As we move forward in this training, you should assume you are a mandatory reporter unless you've been designated as a confidential or semi-confidential resource. As employees of the university, we recognize that you're in a unique position. You are considered a mandatory reporter, but you could also be an emergency responder, a resource, a friend, or a mentor. As we think through how your role as a university employee overlaps with mandatory reporting responsibilities, it's important to start with understanding Title IX. Title IX is a federal law that prohibits discrimination based on sex by any federally funded educational institution. This encompasses a prohibition on sexual harassment and sexual violence. The law requires universities to have certain supports in place for the community, such as having a Title IX coordinator for the institution, making sure that we have education and training on campus around sexual assault and misconduct, encouraging reporting, and ensuring that we have prompt, fair, and equitable grievance procedures to address possible discrimination or harassment. Title IX applies to university programs or activities, including our student and employee environments. The university also complies with other federal and DC laws that prohibit sex discrimination. This training focuses on your obligation to report incidents of sexual misconduct should you become aware of them. As we take a look at Georgetown's policy on sexual misconduct, it's important to note that all forms of sexual misconduct are prohibited. This includes incidents of sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, Title IX sexual harassment, and other sex offenses. This graphic provides an overview of the university's sexual misconduct policy. While it's not necessary that you memorize all of the definitions contained on the slide, it is important for you to know the different types of misconduct that are prohibited on our campus. In particular, it's important for you to know that as a mandatory reporter, any incident of misconduct that could fall within any definition found on this page is something that should be reported to a Title IX coordinator. We're going to talk a bit more about what reporting looks like on the next few slides, but overall, if something could fall under the definitions of sexual misconduct or Title IX sexual harassment, it needs to be reported. As you begin to think about what it means to be a mandatory reporter, we want you to consider how we approach sexual misconduct at Georgetown. We want an employee to first support and then report. Supporting someone begins with transparency. We strongly encourage all faculty members to include language around your mandatory reporting responsibility in your syllabus. Candles and the university's sexual misconduct website both have language available in this area that you can include. Once you receive a disclosure, supporting could mean referring a survivor to a confidential counselor or connecting them with medical care. To provide support, it's really important that you are being thoughtful and empathetic. Once you ensure that the survivor or person making the report has support, you then want to make sure that you're complying with the university's mandatory reporting policies. This policy states that any university employee who becomes aware of conduct that may violate the university's sexual misconduct policy must immediately notify a Title IX coordinator. This includes incidents that have occurred while someone was enrolled at Georgetown or has been an employee of the university. For example, if a student reports experiencing a sexual assault at a party over the weekend, this is something that should be reported, regardless of whether it occurred on campus or whether the alleged perpetrator is a member of the Georgetown community. Similarly, if a colleague discloses that while they were vacationing this past week with their partner in another state, they experienced domestic violence, that is something that would need to be reported to the university. This policy applies even if the incident doesn't involve another member of our community or didn't occur on campus. What's important is that if someone was a member of our community at the time an incident of misconduct occurred, we want to be sure it is reported so we can provide resources and support and make sure that an individual knows about the options available to them. I also want to note one exception to the mandatory reporting requirement. If a student makes a disclosure of sexual misconduct in a class paper or assignment, it is not something that needs to be reported. However, we would still encourage you to remind the student of the confidential resources available to them. One of the great resources that I would encourage you to use as a mandatory reporter is the university's sexualassault.georgetown.edu website. This is where you'll find a comprehensive list of resources both on and off campus. It explains how to access medical assistance and how to preserve evidence, where to find confidential counseling support, and how to access interim supportive measures. The website also shares information on how to report sexual misconduct and the options for pursuing either an internal university or criminal complaint. There's even a specific page dedicated to faculty and staff discussing mandatory reporting and resources. As we take a closer look at the supportive resources available, it's important to start with the confidential counselors that we have on campus. Beginning with health education services and CAPS for the student population, these are offices that provide free confidential counseling for individuals that might have experienced sexual assault or misconduct. As we look at support and resources for faculty and staff, the Faculty and Staff Assistance Program, or FSAP, similarly provides free confidential counseling for all university employees. In looking at medical care, it's important to note that the Washington Hospital Center houses the DC Forensic Nurse Examiners program, and this is where survivors can access medical care and forensic exams following a sexual assault. If an individual is interested, an advocate can be dispatched to the hospital to provide information and support. If a survivor chooses to go to the Washington Hospital Center for an exam, they can call the number on the screen, which will connect them with a service that provides free transportation to the hospital. I'll conclude by noting that no police report is required to access this exam. As you think about receiving a disclosure, there are a few best practices that we wanted to share that have been recommended for those responding to a report of sexual misconduct. You want to do your best at listening, believing, and communicating in a calm and supportive manner. You want to practice reflective listening and be aware of your own body language. You also want to make sure that you share that you have an obligation to report. If a disclosure hasn't yet happened and you feel that one is imminent, we encourage you to gently remind the individual that you do have a reporting obligation. That way, if they decide they would rather talk to someone else, such as a confidential counselor, they have the choice and ability to do so. We want to remind you that it's not your responsibility to investigate or try to fix the situation. There are other individuals on campus that will handle those types of responsibilities. What's really important is that you be supportive and understanding, as it's really what a survivor will need most. If you receive a disclosure of sexual misconduct, you should contact one of the Title IX coordinators. This could be the university's Title IX coordinator, or it could be one of the 7 deputy Title IX coordinators located at each of our campuses and within IDEA. All of the information reported to a Title IX coordinator will be treated sensitively and is only shared with the individuals that need to know. Thank you for completing part 1 of this training session. We will now move into part 2, a more in-depth discussion of what happens when a report is made and an overview of Georgetown's formal complaint options and processes. So what happens once a report is made to a Title IX coordinator? This is often a question that is really important, not only for the person making the report, but also for the survivor or the person that might have disclosed the information. Once a report comes into the office, a Title IX coordinator will reach out to the survivor or the person that experienced the misconduct to coordinate a response. This outreach is done through an email, which will include an overview of resources and options available to them, including confidential counseling services, campus referrals, safety planning, supportive measures, and options for filing a formal complaint. This email does not require that a particular action be taken or even a response to the email itself. The university just wants to make sure that a survivor is aware of their resources and options. If an individual, after disclosing an incident of sexual misconduct to you that requires a mandatory report, then requests confidentiality, this can be a really difficult conversation for all individuals involved. Often, someone has come to you because they trust you, they view you as a resource, and they may not have known that you had an obligation to report the information to someone else. So, when this happens, it's important that you share some information that will hopefully alleviate some of the concerns and questions that they have. You want to remind them that you have this obligation to report so that the university can address and remedy the misconduct and offer resources. We will strive to respect the survivor's wishes in all cases about how to handle and respond to the report. Further, the Title IX coordinator will keep all information about the incident private to the fullest extent possible, only sharing information with those that need to know. Finally, we know it's helpful for the survivor to know what will happen once you make a report, and that's why having an understanding of the previous slide is so important. I do want to note a few exceptions to the mandatory reporting requirement, mostly because it's important for individuals to know where there are resources that can keep things more confidential than the standard employee. Georgetown has professional licensed counselors or pastoral counselors who provide mental health or pastoral counseling to members of the community. These are considered confidential resources, which means that even if someone discusses an incident of sexual misconduct with them, they are not required to report that information to a Title IX coordinator. We also have a group of what we call semi confidential resources. These are individuals that serve as non licensed counselors, advocates, and staff who work or volunteer in the Women's Center, the LGBTQ Resource Center, campus ministry, and select staff in CMEA and GSP. In these spaces, individuals must report general information about an incident disclosed to them, such as the time, place, and nature of the incident, to a Title IX coordinator, but they are not required to report identifying information. It's important for survivors to be aware of their resources, but also the formal complaint options available to them. A survivor can choose to file a formal complaint with the university under Georgetown's grievance procedures, with the police as a criminal complaint, with both entities, or choose not to file a complaint at all. It is completely up to the survivor. If someone is unsure about whether or not they want to file a formal complaint, we encourage them to first speak to a confidential counselor, such as Health Education Services or FSAP. Although different from our policy on sexual misconduct, it's important for you to also be aware of the university's policy on consensual sexual or romantic relationships. This policy details what relationships are appropriate between community members of the university and how individuals should go about ensuring that no conflicts of interest exist if they are in a relationship with someone else at the institution. It is imperative to note that under no circumstance should an undergraduate student be involved in a romantic or sexual relationship with a faculty member. If you become aware of a situation that might violate this policy, you should report your concerns to the Office of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Affirmative Action, also known as IDEA. Finally, I want to conclude by highlighting some of the self care resources that you may find helpful. As always, for medical care related to an incident of sexual assault, you are encouraged to seek help through the DC Forensic Nurse Examiners Program at the Washington Hospital Center. The Faculty and Staff Assistance Program offers free confidential counseling to all university employees. If you have concerns of safety, you are encouraged to contact GUPD or your local police department. And finally, with any questions or concerns, you are encouraged to talk with a Title IX coordinator. The Title IX office is happy to provide information, support, resources, and answer any questions you might have. We appreciate your time and encourage you to review and utilize the university's sexual misconduct website at sexualassault.georgetown.edu. Thank you.